Good evening, Heart for the Community. Good evening, Facebook. Good evening, our viewing area. Heart for the Community Initiatives interview series is back again, and we have another very important guest. As you can see, congressional candidate Qasim Rashid is with us today, and we're going to give him an opportunity before the primary elections in just a couple of days to tell you who he is if you don't already know, and to tell you what he's all about. So we're going to give you a minute, if you will. Call your friends, call your family, start a watch party. We want as many people as we can to know who Qasim Rashid is, what he's all about. There's a very real chance that he will be our congressional representative for the Virginia 1st Congressional District. And if that would be true, we want to make sure that we know who he is. All right. So, Qasim Rashid, we thank you so much. What an honor and pleasure it is for you to be with us on our platform and allowing this interview to happen. Thank you and welcome, sir.
Carl, the privilege and the honor is mine to be invited and to share this platform with you. Thank you for the opportunity. I look forward to speaking with our constituents directly and answering questions and just having a frank and open dialogue.
Wonderful. Well, for those who do not know, Mr. Qasim Rashid has been busy for quite a long time. He's an immigration lawyer, he's a human rights lawyer, he's a media and book consultant, he's a public speaker, he's a husband and a father. So before we go any further, let me please tell you Happy Father's Day to you, sir.
Thank you, and likewise, my friend.
Thank you so much. Well, Mr. Qasim Rashid, you are vying for the votes for this coming to this primary election. Can you tell our audience something about yourself and why you want to represent us so badly?
Sure. Well, yeah. So the primary election is on June 23rd. So I encourage everyone to have a plan to vote. If you need help or assistance in any way, reach out to us. We're at rashidforva.com. You can send us an email. You can call us, and we'd be happy to provide support. What I ask for, or why I'm asking to earn your vote, is my entire career has been focused on human rights issues. Racial justice initiatives, supporting marginalized communities, supporting women who are survivors of domestic and sexual violence, criminal justice reform, healthcare and education. These are all things that have been ingrained in my DNA as an advocate. And I've worked in the trenches, and I can talk more about this in detail a little bit later, but I've worked in the trenches with the very communities that I want to serve. And I've come to see firsthand that a system cannot fail those it was never meant to protect. And that's really the ground reality with a lot of the systems that we have right now, is that it's not that they're failing, it's that they're working in the unjust manner that they were built. And so as a human rights lawyer, I understand where these injustices exist, and I'm fighting for justice. I've been fighting for justice. And not only do I have the experience to bring about better policy, but our campaign team is phenomenal. We have the cream of the crop. We've fundraised well more than our Republican opponent without taking a dime of corporate money. And we have the reach and the platform to make sure that our message gets out there. And so the magic ingredient are our constituents that we hope to earn their trust and have their vote on the 23rd.
Thank you. Qasim, you have been a pretty steady presence lately at several of the Black Lives Matter rallies and protests. I want you to tell our audience how that became so important to you.
Sure. I mean, this has been in my DNA from the get-go. Being present at these rallies is the bare minimum that I think anyone should be doing. You have to be visible. You have to stand in solidarity with marginalized communities, with hurting communities, and you have to fight for justice and be consistent in that. But what I want to share is that coming to these rallies isn't something that just happened for me when these rallies began. I've been marching for justice and peace for decades. In 2010, there was a rally in Washington, D.C. that I was a part of to promote peace. But even before then, one of the organizations that I've worked extensively with is an organization called Humanity First. And we work on building hospitals and schools and providing disaster relief. When Hurricane Katrina hit, I was a senior in college and taking my midterm exams. And I skipped out on my midterms to go down with my brother to Louisiana for a couple of weeks to provide support to our neighbors in Louisiana. And so when things like what happened to Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and before them, Tamir Rice, Trayvon Martin, Freddie Gray, Eric Garner. I mean, the list goes on and on. Unfortunately, when things like this happen, my work as a human rights lawyer has been to elevate the voices of those who've been marginalized. I don't like to say speak for the voiceless or be a voice for the voiceless. I don't think we need to be voices for the voiceless. I think we need to learn to pass the mic. And that's what I've tried to do with my work, is to elevate these marginalized voices, make sure there's more exposure so that they can tell their stories. And that's involved me working with the Virginia State prison system. I've been a chaplain for many years. It's involved me working with the Virginia Poverty Law Center, the Virginia Center for Inclusive Communities, and there's a whole host of other organizations. Now ERA, which Juanita Banks is a wonderful woman working on prison reform. So when people manifest, Dr. King said that a riot, for example, is the language of the unheard. And when people manifest in protests, not even riots, but even in protests, even I would argue a protest is the language of the unheard, because people are protesting because they've been ignored for so long. And so I'm just trying to be present and show my solidarity with my neighbors, with my family, to let them know that I stand with them, not just in verbal promises, but I'm physically there with them, and I will continue to fight with them. And the last thing I'll say about this particular question is that this is an open invitation, especially if you're a minor. For parents, if you have children who have been arrested, who have been hurt or harmed in these protests, let us know, because we've made an agreement with several Virginia-based defense attorneys who will provide pro bono representation. And this is part of our Compassion Through Action initiative, where we are providing food and water and support to those who are struggling. And to date, we've helped directly about 1,000 people. And so if you need legal support, let us know, and we will do our best. This is for minors in particular, people under 18. Let us know, because we want to be involved and we want to provide support as best as we can.
Thank you for that information. I just want to remind our audience, if you have a question or comment, please feel free to post it. If it's good enough, we'll post it to the candidate. So, Qasim, I know you have been very present in this, what I'm about to ask you. We've seen so much by way of police brutality. This is not new. What happened to Mr. George Floyd is not new to those of us who have felt like we've been under the gun. What it did was peeled off the scab of a wound that's not quite healed.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you stand when it comes to police reforms? And specifically, where are the areas where you think that would work as far as police reform dealing with unarmed public persons?
Well, let me start by saying what's not going to work. And what the Republican plan that they've called the Justice Act is, I think, an insult to actual reform, an insult to actual progress. It doesn't ban chokeholds. It doesn't ban no-knock warrants. It doesn't get rid of qualified immunity. It doesn't actually create any kind of reform. In fact, it adds more funding to law enforcement. And as we already know, that giving law enforcement the massive amounts of funding that we've already given them hasn't solved the problem. This is a systemic issue, and it requires a systemic solution. And so at the very minimum, we need to ban things like chokeholds. There's no need for a chokehold. We need to ban no-knock warrants. We have due process of law. We have a constitution. We have a requirement to get a warrant and to pursue accordingly. Breonna Taylor would be alive right now if no-knock warrants were banned. But she's not. And today is the 100th day that her killers are walking free on the streets. 2 of them still have their jobs, which is just, it's an insult to basic morality. So in addition to that, we need to get rid of qualified immunity. Qualified immunity is in layman's terms, it basically prevents a law enforcement officer from being held accountable for on-the-job acts in a private capacity. It shields them from accountability if they engage in police brutality. And I think that should be objectionable to anyone who believes that the law should apply equally to all of us. No one is above the law. Look, if you go to the doctor and he commits medical malpractice, they lose their medical license. If I, as a lawyer, commit legal malpractice with a client, I could lose my bar license. I can't say I've got immunity. That doesn't make any sense at all. And law enforcement officers shouldn't have that immunity either. But I think the other thing is we need to recognize that we've put law enforcement officers in a position of performing responsibilities that they're not equipped for. And that also is something that requires reform, systemic reform. I talked about this the other day that, every one of us, for example, likely knows somebody who struggles with mental health issues. And so imagine if someone you know, or even if it's you, you're having a mental health episode and you need assistance. Do you want an armed law enforcement officer with no training to come and support you? Or do you want a trained mental health professional who understands the particularities of mental health and has de-escalation training to support you? Of course, we all want the latter. And so we need to fund those positions. So rather than just throwing more money at law enforcement, we should be investing in better social programs so that when someone has a mental health issue, they get actual support. When someone has an addiction issue, they get support from addiction experts. When there's a school fight, we don't need armed law enforcement breaking up a school fight. We can have child counselors or child advocates working in that space. And these are the ways we can not only better hold accountable law enforcement, but ensure that our community gets the support that they need. And then if we have an incident of police brutality, in addition to having a more stringent internal investigation, there should be an independent external body that also investigates police brutality. Right now, you've got the same prosecutors who work with police on every other issue also working with them on this issue. You can't govern yourself in that respect. There has to be a separate body that does those investigations. So I believe if we focus on this communal aspect of it, by ensuring that the police officers aren't above the law, but also ensuring we're not putting police officers in a burden that makes them do things that they're not qualified for, that's unfair to them as well, we can not only significantly decrease police brutality, but we can increase trust and increase accountability while ensuring that our neighbors and our constituents have the mental health, the addiction, the homeless, the child in school support that every single member of our community wants and deserves.
Thank you. That was valuable information. I would imagine that all the years of working as an immigration lawyer and as a human rights lawyer, that you understand systemic racism.
Mhm.
How do you handle those who deny that there is still systemic racism? How do you explain it?
Right. Yeah. I mean, how do you convince a flat earther that the Earth is global? That it's not flat, right? I mean, there's certain things that you got to pick your battles. What I believe is that you don't necessarily have to beat your head against a wall with folks who just simply deny systemic racism exists. To quote my good friend Delegate Jennifer Carroll Foy, who's running for governor, she goes, with these kinds of individuals, if you can't change their minds, you change their seats. The Republican opponent that I'm running against denies that systemic racism exists. He denies that police brutality exists. He has a difficult time saying Black Lives Matter. He's not going to change his mind because he is incentivized politically and financially to continue to dig his heels in and follow Trump's lead, not follow what justice actually mandates. And so with those kinds of individuals, my response is we're gonna vote you out. We're gonna bring in justice-based leadership, people who actually understand these issues because they've studied them, they've worked on these issues on an intimate level, and we're gonna do this by rallying our community together, people who are on the right and on the left working together for these common issues. And what I can tell you in my campaigning is I've been meeting with folks who identify as conservatives and Republicans, because I believe that we need to have that dialogue. And that's not to say I compromise any of my values or principles, but it's that it allows me to have that conversation with them on a more one-to-one level. And when we talk, again, my Republican opponent has said that we absolutely will not be touching funding for police departments at all. But when I speak to my conservative constituents and gave that exact same analogy, for example, on mental health treatment, they all agree, well, yeah, that makes more sense. We should be funding that. Look, well, that's what it means to reallocate the funding. It doesn't mean we shut down the police department. It means that we specify more narrowly what the police department is responsible for, and what they are being overburdened with, we give to people who are trained in that space. But we're not gonna. There's no magic pill that we're going to, give to people, and they're going to say, oh, okay, now I understand systemic racism. And this is a much broader issue than just a certain faction of society. Dr. King talked about this when he talks about the white moderate, who is more content with a negative piece, which is the absence of tension, than a positive piece, which is the presence of justice. And so we need to talk about that positive piece. We need to get people to come out and have these conversations and be candid and sincere. And some of these are uncomfortable conversations, but that discomfort is far less painful than a knee in the back of George Floyd's neck. And I think that's the comparison that we need to be making. So those who insist on denying the reality of things like systemic racism, I'm not worried about convincing them. I'm worried about how do we convince at least 51% of our district to say, hey, there's a better way out there. And I think that happens by us coming together, having a deeper conversation, not just waiting until election day to go out and vote and that's it, but being involved in campaigns now. And that's my invitation to folks watching this: get involved now, because the sooner you can get involved, the more consequential you can be, the bigger impact you can have, and the better chance we have of collectively making this movement one that actually brings about a flip in the district. Dr. King said it best, that those who love peace must organize better than those who love war. That's what we're fighting for.
Thank you for that. So, Qasim, what makes you so much different than your Democratic opponent, Ms. Vanjia Williams? Of course, it'll be your name and her name in the primary. What makes you so much different than her?
Well, I have a lot of respect for Ms. Williams, and I respect that we've kept this campaign clean and about the issues. Certainly, we disagree on policy initiatives, and I think that's where I believe our campaign is better suited and has simply better policies. For one, let me start with the non-policy things. On an infrastructure level, we have created a team that can take on the Republican incumbent. We have over 100 folks between staff, interns, and volunteers, over 100 folks working on our team right now. And these are folks who are actively engaged, they're involved, we're meeting with them on a regular basis. So we have the infrastructure, and that team is growing rapidly. The second thing is that we have the ability to get our messaging out there through social media. Our social media platform is about 500,000 followers. The Republican incumbents is only about 30 or 40,000. So we're 10 times larger and more impactful, so we can get the message out there. And if you want to understand how critical that is, the fact that Trump has a massive social media platform is one reason why Republicans refuse to go against him. They don't want to get tweeted at and have their careers destroyed. We are using that for good. We're using our social media platform for good, to bring people together, to talk about our compassion through action initiatives, to build bridges of understanding. And so that's something that is tangible and is real. And along with that, we have the financial resources as well. We have out-fundraised our Republican opponent by over $100,000 already. In fact, I think about over $150,000, if I'm not mistaken. And that's important because, at the end of the day, we need to be able to get the message out there. It's just as simple as that. If we can't get the message out there, if we can't buy the ad space or the radios or the television advertisements, people aren't going to know we're running. So we need to let them know that. And we're doing it the right way by rejecting all corporate funding whatsoever. We're 100% grassroots funded as well. And that's something that my Republican opponent can't say. But then on the issues as well, we believe healthcare is a human right. And we're fighting for a universal Medicare for all single payer system. The other distinction is that I believe that broadband must be a regulated utility. It's long overdue for this to be a regulated utility. Maybe 25 years ago, we could have argued that this was a luxury. But in the 21st century, if we want our children to be up to speed on 21st century technology and 21st century access, we need to provide that. And we have a plan to make it not only affordable, but to have federal dollars invest directly into municipalities, bypass the corporations who are only interested in a profit, and ensuring that every single municipality has access to build high-speed broadband. And what that's going to do is it's going to give children access in their schools. Right now, in our rural parts of our district, they're sitting at McDonald's, for God's sake, which is a disgrace. So it'll give them direct access to high-speed internet. It will give small business owners a way to compete with businesses in larger cities. Right now, you can't even start a small business in a viable way because you don't have high-speed internet. It's going to give small farmers access to data that they crucially need to be able to plant a successful crop. It's going to give hospitals a revitalization, rural hospitals, to make sure that they can provide proper healthcare. I spoke to somebody who lived, I think, in Gloucester, telling me they had to drive 2 hours to get to a Richmond area hospital when his wife was expecting, it's just mind-boggling to me. It's a health hazard. So those are two really major issues where we disagree. I think also in criminal justice reform, I'm more progressive. I believe we should immediately decriminalize marijuana, and we need to not leave it up to the states. It needs to be federally decriminalized. We need to we also need to expunge all records of anyone who has a marijuana conviction, and then we also need to make sure that the first folks who get access to tax dollars and tax revenue and small business opportunities are the Black and brown communities that have been targeted heavily, and make sure that they get first shot at helping rebuild their own communities. Also on voting rights, I'm more progressive. I don't believe that someone who has committed a felony should have their voting rights taken away. They should still be allowed to vote. The only exception I can think of is if somebody committed a felony that involved voter fraud or election fraud. That makes sense to me, to have them lose their right to vote because they actually violated voting law. But the history of felon disenfranchisement is grounded in racism. These laws, as a human rights lawyer that's studied this history, these laws had nothing to do with the founding of our country. They began to become prominent around 1830 to 1850 when the abolitionist movement became strong and people realized that there may be a whole lot more Black people voting, and we need to do something to prevent that. And that's where these felon disenfranchisement laws came into play. So we need to get rid of that altogether. We need to get rid of the disenfranchisement from financial aid, from Section 8 housing, from SNAP and TANF, from federal student aid. All this should be banned once someone has left their or completed their term in incarceration. They've paid their debt to society. We cannot continue to tie this ball and chain to them. So these are three of the areas where I believe I'm more progressive, and I believe I'm on the right side of history because this is what people need and want, and this is what they deserve as a basic human rights level. And you combine my policy issues with the ability to get our message out there, the ability to have the financial means to get our message out there, we would very respectfully submit that we are the stronger candidate to be able to flip this district blue come November.
You hit on two very important topics for me.
Yeah.
First of all, restoring voter rights for felons.
Mm-hmm.
I have been wondering for years, and I'm so glad that you have made this part of your platform.
Yeah.
What would you do specifically, especially in the state of Virginia? I know that you'll be a congressional representative, but still you have ties with the state officials.
Yeah.
How do we get this done? There's an entire voter block that is excluded, and they have paid their debt to society, but still cannot vote. What will be done specifically? And also, what does decriminalization of marijuana look like? The specifics.
Well, so right now there is a schedule of drugs that are considered to be illegal narcotics, and so we need to remove marijuana from that schedule of drugs. It should be regulated like alcohol, taxed and regulated, and there should be an age. I think I would argue probably 21 or 23, depending on what the scientists tell us, where you can buy it. But it should be regulated the same way as alcohol. It's much safer than alcohol. The number of people who have ever died from a marijuana overdose is 0. So it's far safer. So it's ridiculous to continue to criminalize this. So it needs to be immediately decriminalized. If anything, there's a civil penalty of $25 for public. I guess just like there's for public intoxication, should be a similar thing here as well. But on a practical level for the voting rights, there's two ways to approach this: on the state level for Virginia, but also on a federal level. On a state level, we can introduce legislation, and I'm already speaking to a few members of the Virginia legislature to introduce legislation to ensure that voting rights for felons are never taken away. And there is precedent from this, not only from U.S. history, but even on a contemporary level. Two states, I think Maine and New Hampshire, or Maine and Vermont, I can't remember what the second one is, do not remove voting rights for felons. Felons can still vote while they're in prison. And those states haven't fallen apart or fallen into any kind of disarray. They still work just fine, just as well as any other state. So we know that this works. We know it does not harm society by any stretch. And so we can use that contemporary precedent to have Virginia legislature pass this kind of law. And I think with the majorities in the House and the Senate and a Democratic governor, it's possible to do so if we can get the political will to do it. Or we could do it on a federal level. And the way that federal law interacts with state law is that federal law always trumps state law. And so whatever law on a federal level is passed on things like criminal justice, that becomes the bare minimum. Now, states can afford more rights than that, but they can't do less than that. So if state law says that felons are able to vote while in prison, then a state cannot say that we are going to exclude that, because now the federal law has already established what the bare minimum is. And so introducing federal legislation is something that we can absolutely do. I know there are several senators who support this, and there are several in the House of Representatives as well. But in building that momentum, that's one area where I differ immensely from my Republican opponent. And one really tangible benefit and response to voting him out and voting us in is going to be to push forward aggressively this campaign for voter re-enfranchisement. And I'll also add this really key element, that what we're seeing happening in Kentucky right now is a disgrace, where 3,700 polling locations have been shut down, and now it's down to 200 polling locations. In Jefferson County, which is 600,000 citizens, half of whom are Black, it's the largest Black county in Kentucky, have one polling location to go to. This is voter disenfranchisement. This is voter suppression 101. And this is the result of the Supreme Court gutting the Voting Rights Act. And last year, the House successfully passed the Voting Advancement Act, the Voting Rights Advancement Act of 2019. It's sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk right now. He could put it up for a vote. It could pass. It could be law tomorrow, but he won't, because Republicans are bent, unfortunately, on voter suppression. My Republican opponent voted against it. For some reason, voting rights aren't a priority to him. And the reason is that they know that when there's a higher voter turnout, Democrats win. If you have to suppress the vote to win, that's not a democracy anymore. That's a dictatorship that you're trying to run. And that is contrary to what this Constitution is supposed to be. So, voting rights are near and dear to my heart for a number of other reasons I can discuss more later on, but I will absolutely be a champion in this space.
Thank you. I'm sure that you realize that from the recent activity from Mr. Floyd's death, there have been many grassroots organizations that have sprung up and are speaking very loudly to our elected officials. And there are many who deal with economic empowerment by Black and all that kind of stuff. How do you feel about what you see with these grassroots organizations that are sprouting up and having a big voice on the local and national scene?
To quote Dr. King, right? Those who love peace must organize better than those who love war. And when I see these younger organizations, cropping up, I think it's a good thing. I think young people being involved is an extraordinarily good thing. A great man once said that nations cannot be reformed without the reformation of their youth. And so when I see young people trying to reform the nation by upholding justice as a supreme focus, I get excited. I obviously want to make sure that the organizations are viable and they are well led, and that's obviously a concern with any organization. But I think the more young people can get involved, the better. And I've been working with several local organizations here in Virginia as well. Throughout these processes. In fact, we were going to have an event on police brutality just a few days ago. It got rained out. We're going to reschedule it. But my heart is warmed when I see young people being so active and involved because they're taking ownership. They're not taking a backseat to anyone. And it's a reflection of U.S. history. Dr. King was only 26 when he was president of the Alabama bus boycott. Claudette Colvin was only 15 when 9 months before Rosa Parks, she refused to get up for a white man and helped spark that boycott as well. Robert Smalls was only 23 when he escaped slavery, commandeered a Confederate vessel, learned the secret codes, escaped to Union waters, and then fought against the Confederacy, defeated them, and then later became one of the first Black members of U.S. Congress. He won a seat to Congress. Ruby Bridges was only 6 years old when she, first Black girl to desegregate an all-white school in the South. So this has been the history of American civil rights progress, where young people are grabbing the mantle and running forward without slowing down. And it's exciting to see that same enthusiasm and energy from young people right now. And I'm privileged to be a fly on the wall and supporting however I can.
Thank you. We want to be respectful of your time, Qasim. You've been so gracious with allowing the interview to happen.
Yeah.
So before we close out, what is it that you want to communicate to the voters before they hit the polls on Tuesday? If you could leave them with one last thought, what would it be?
Look, today's Father's Day, and one of the most important lessons that my father ever taught me was that your whole purpose in life is service to all humanity. And if you're not serving humanity, you're wasting your time. And my message to the voters is exactly that the vote that we are making is just the first step. It's the bare minimum in our mission to serve humanity. Spend your next 5 months, these next few months are going to be consequential to the next 50 years of our nation's future, because we've got the census results coming out, we've got a new administration potentially. If we don't get this right this November, then we are relegating ourselves to a really difficult next several decades. And I don't know what that is going to entail. But the good news is that you have immense power and immense control. Lead with compassion, serve humanity, vote, and get involved. Get involved with our campaign, get involved with a local race, a local leader, but get involved somehow. Don't sit on the sidelines. You have the power and you have the ability to influence the future of this country in a positive, compassionate way. We hope to have earned your trust so you can vote with us and support us and be involved with us. But the bottom line is, no matter what you do, just get involved, fight for compassion, and remember that our purpose here is to serve humanity. If we're doing that, we're doing it right.
Thank you so much, Mr. Qasim Rashid. Ladies and gentlemen, he is one of your Democratic candidates for the congressional seat for the 1st Congressional District of Virginia. You have heard directly from him. We thank our audience for all of the comments that you made. You're wonderful, you're awesome, and hopefully the information that Mr. Qasim Rashid shared today will help you to make a more informed decision on Tuesday. Sir, once again, we thank you and we thank your campaign. You've been so gracious, and we hope to one day do this again with you.
Thank you, Carl. God bless you. Take care.
God bless you. Have a great evening.
You too.